Good afternoon. I'm Jeffrey White, and I'll be the MC for today. Welcome Professor Tim Noakes, John O'Proudfoot, academics, ladies and gentlemen, Validus, Wimbledon, and the Rubik's clusters, the fellow academians, fellow staff, and fellow students. Just for some background knowledge, the bathrooms are to my left, to your right. In case of an emergency, you will please just make yourself comfortable on the grass behind you. And then once again, please turn off all cell phones. Thank you. A brief bio about Tim Noakes. Tim is a highly respected South African professor of exercise and sports sciences at the University of Cape Town. He has run more than 70 marathons and ultramarathons and is the author of books The Law of Running, Challenging Beliefs, and Waterlogged. After publishing his latest book, Tim entered the dietary sphere, challenging the science behind obesity, coronary heart disease, and heart attacks. Tim has dedicated his later life to opening people's eyes to the myth of low-fat eating and the nutritional and environmental crisis it has now left on us. Moving on to John O'Proudfoot. John, after training and working in 5 times rated top 10 restaurants in his early career, Jono moved through a variety of food and wine establishments before finding his passion in paleo and low-carbon, high-fat cookery. Since the birth of his interest in performance food and nutrition, he has hosted 52 episodes of award-winning children's cooking show, What's Your Flavor? An introduction into today's discussion. Wellness is a priority for good quality of life in the students, addressed in a holistic way by focusing on individuals' emotional, spiritual, intellectual, social, career, and physical wellness, in an effort to encourage students to give some thought to their eating habits. As part of their physical wellness, the university clusters, a cluster is a group or an organization of students or for a PSO, have invited Tim Noakes to participate in a talk about his book, The Real Meal Revolution, in association with Van Skype Bookstore. Professor Noakes is known for promoting a protein-rich, high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet, and this talk promises to be highly informative. He will be supported by co-author and chef John O'Proudfoot at the presentation. I'd now like to invite Professor Noakes to the stage.
Well, thank you very much for that very warm welcome, and thank you all for taking the time to come and listen. We're really, really proud to be here, and of course this is my very favorite university. And your campus looks just stunning today in the sun, and I know why you love it. I must tell you that for 30 years I've spent my time coming to Kutsenberg for our rugby team to be beaten. So why do I respect Stellenbosch University? Because they've set the standard for us, and if we've ever tried to aspire to anything at rugby at the University of Cape Town, I promise you it's because of the standard that you guys have set. I'd also like to say that it was mentioned I'd run a few marathons. The very first marathon I ever ran, September 1972, was here in Stellenbosch. There was a Stellenbosch marathon. And the race was won by my great friend, the late Ferdi Lagrange, who was an astonishing athlete. He probably would have won a gold medal in the 1972 Olympics, but South Africa was not allowed to compete. He was a medical student at Stellenbosch University. Although he was working a 100-hour week, at the time of his peak, he would train at midnight along Voortrekker Road. And he always inspired me, as that's what Stellenbosch teaches you, grit and hard work and determination. So I'm really excited that we have the chance to speak to you, Because when I went my journey started 4 years ago when I realized that my health was not great, and I'd followed everything that I'd been told to do. For 33 years, I'd eaten this fantastic diet, this high carbohydrate, low fat diet, and all that had happened, I got fat, I got lazy, I could barely run, and I was fed up with many things. And because I'm a very quick adapter, I came home from a run one morning and I said, something's got to change. And I fortunately opened my emails and there was an advert for a book. And it says, lose 6 kilograms in 6 weeks without hunger. And I said, but I'm a medical doctor. I know that if you're going to lose weight, you have to suffer. How can you lose weight without hunger? And then the name appeared, Atkins. And for those of you who perhaps older like myself, Atkins was a guy who in 1968-69 said that if we ate a high protein and a high fat diet, we'd lose hunger and lose weight. And he was demonized and written out of history by the United States, many people in the United States. And the reality, he was a genius. And the best nutrition book ever written is called Dr. Atkins' Diet Revolution. The 1972 version is genius, because he describes everything that Jono and I talk about is in that book. But by 2010, when I started my change, Atkins was completely demonized. So when I saw his name, I thought, but how can these people associate it with him? And then I realized that there were 3 of the best scientists I knew, because we had done some research on high-fat diets in the 1980s, inspired by their work. So I went down to exclusive books in near my hometown city, village, and bought the book. It was the last copy in the shop, and I went home, and within 20 minutes reading, I realized we'd been lied to. And that's my message. We've been lied to. And everything I thought that was right about nutrition, and everything I'd been speaking about for 30 years, I realized was utterly wrong. And I'm just going to give you an interesting aside that the biggest medical problem in the world is a condition called insulin resistance, and we don't even teach it at medical school. Insulin resistance is the cause of obesity, diabetes, hypertension, a whole bunch of other things. And I come from a family that is profoundly insulin resistant. And my father died from type 2 diabetes, all the complications. And after I'd been speaking about the Atkins diet and low-carb eating for 3 years, my sister called me aside one day and she says, Tim, I've been on this diet for 40 years. So I said, well, why didn't you tell me? She said, I didn't want to tell you were wrong all these years. So it's unfortunate that my sister didn't inform me earlier. So why were we lied to? What you have to understand in science and in medicine is you can't exclude the history. You can't exclude evolution, paleoanthropology, and so on. You cannot exclude it. 3 million years ago, we were small people, and we're now much bigger. And the change was brought because the brain got a whole bunch bigger. And the reason why we need a very nutrient-dense diet is because we have this big brain. It is absolutely at its limits. We have to provide nutrients to our brain. And it's crucial from a young age that those nutrients should be provided. So if you look back in history, and if you could go back to 1600 when Stellenbosch was first settled and find out what the people were eating, I'll tell you what they were eating. They were eating hippopotamus and elephant and rhinoceros. They were eating high-fat foods. And you have to read that because go and read Louis Leipold, who started the South African Medical Journal, was one of the first practicing doctors in the Western Cape. That's what he describes eating, hippopotamus in Cape Town. So my point being that when you go back and you study societies and populations, you will find that we sought out the fattest animals that we could find. Because humans, in my opinion, are driven to find fat. And what happened with the British Empire, unfortunately, is that they spread the sugar industry through slavery and all those sorts of problems. And sugar replaced fat as our craving. So we stopped craving fat and we started craving sugar. And in all populations that crave fat, you will see as soon as sugar comes in, they lose the desire for fat. And so our biology, if you really study it carefully, is that we are carnivorous animals designed to burn fat. That's the key. And it's got distorted. So that's my first point. You have to go back to the history of what we ate. And it's really interesting, looking at a farming community like the Boers in South Africa. Why are Stellenbosch students bigger than Cape Town students? And I'll tell you, at least the boys. Because the boys come from the farms. And what do they eat on the farm? They eat lots of protein and fat and dairy. It's lamb chops for breakfast, lamb chops for lunch, and steak for dinner. And if you want a big men, that's how you build it. I've had the privilege of working with Schalk Burger over the years, one of your greatest rugby players. And I mean, you just got to see his hands. The bones, every single bone, is twice the size of mine. And where did it come from? I think it's history of a very high-fat, high-protein diet for generations. And that's what makes big people. And what's happened? We took that out of our diet and we replaced it with cereals and grains. And we know in 12,000 years ago, when we went to agriculture, we started getting smaller. And people say, Tim, you're a hell of a tall. And I'm not. I wasn't tall 40 years ago. I'm tall now because I think the generation is smaller. Your generation is smaller. Why? Because you were brought up on my diet, unfortunately. Lots of carbohydrates and less fat and protein. So what happened then was in 1977, on the basis of absolutely no evidence, we took fat out the diet and we said you must eat cereals and grains. And it was the single worst experiment in the history of humankind. So we took out the nutrients we needed and we replaced it with cereals and grains. And 3 years later, your generation started getting fat. So the obesity epidemic begins in 1980. Not in 1970 or 1960 when I was at school, in 1980. And it really frightens me because when I was at school, everyone was lean, except the odd child. And I remember we had one big kid at school, and we thought he had cancer or something, because obesity just was so uncommon. And that tragically has changed. So the question is, why did it happen? Why did the obesity epidemic suddenly occur in 1980? And my explanation is very simple. And it's not complex. See, what you've been taught is because you all become lazy. Suddenly, we all became lazy and we didn't exercise and we watched television. And that is nonsense. And the reason it's nonsense is because in our brains we have an apostat, which regulates how much energy you eat, and it matches it exactly to how much energy you're expending. So if you go home today and you don't exercise, as long as your apostat's working, all that happens is you will eat less today, and your weight will stay stable. Exercise has, in my opinion, got absolutely nothing to do with weight control at all. If you have to exercise to control your weight, your diet is wrong. I'm a good example. My weight is now back to what it was when I was 18, when I was 28, and when I was 30. When I was 30, I was running 120 to 160 kilometers a week. And I was this weight. Now I train 30 kilometers a week, I'm the same weight. How's that possible when I'm doing a fifth of the training? How's it possible? Because my nutrition was a disaster 30, 40 years ago. I was eating so much carbohydrate that I had to run 120 kilometers to try and get rid of this excess carbohydrate. Because you have to understand that the one nutrient the human body has absolutely no requirement for is carbohydrate. You have no biological need for it whatsoever. None at all. And so what we've said a balanced diet is one that contains 60% carbohydrate. That's ridiculous. How can that be when it's the one nutrient you don't need? So if you're taking in too much carbohydrate and you're what I am, insulin resistant, you can only do one thing with it. You store it as fat. But worse, carbohydrates do not satiate your appetite. They drive hunger. And the best example I can give you, or the best experiment I can give you, is the following. If you had cereals and grains for breakfast, I can predict by 10 o'clock you had to eat again. And by 1 o'clock you had to eat again. And by 3 o'clock you had to eat again. That's what happens, because the cereals and grains drive the apostat to make you hungry. And that is addictive eating. Did you hear it? If you're eating every 3 hours, you have an addictive eating pattern. Now, I encourage you tomorrow morning to get up 10 minutes earlier and cook some bacon, cook eggs, and eat fat and protein. And surprisingly, at 10 o'clock you won't be hungry. And you might even get to lunchtime and not be hungry. And if you're like me, you'll get to 5 o'clock in the afternoon and not be hungry. And that's the difference. So when Atkins said it's a diet that takes away hunger, he was absolutely right. And we don't know how it works completely, but what we absolutely do know is that carbohydrates drive hunger. So what we did in 1980 was we encouraged the population to eat more carbohydrates, and they started to eat more calories. And then industry got really clever, because industry discovered that if you take fat out of a food, it tastes like cardboard. Those dreadful cereals that you eat in the morning, they are cardboard, but the only reason you don't know they're cardboard is because they've got so much sugar on them that you think they're lekker. But they aren't. They're just cardboard. Now, industry got very clever, and it said, great, sugar is addictive. Sugar is as addictive as heroin and cocaine, probably more addictive. So they realized if we just add sugar to these products, we'll be able to sell more because we'll addict everyone to them. And that's what happened. So the current obesity epidemic is driven by the processed food industry, who provide food that is highly addictive. And that is why you can't eat one Pringle chip. It's impossible. And why most of us can't eat a single square of chocolate. It's impossible. Because both those products are designed with the bliss point in mind. Now, the bliss point is designed by scientists who work out the exact amount of sugar, salt, and fat in every product that will make it utterly addictive to you. So they get PhDs for this. And that's the point. So when you go to the cafeteria, which I hope we're going to ban all of the cafeterias on this campus, but when you go to them and you look at all those foods and you think they're designed to give you nutrition, they are not. They're just designed to feed your addiction. You have to understand that. They're designed to feed your addiction. And the industry knows that it's the cause of obesity, and the only way we're going to change it is to change processed foods. So what I've said then, in summary, is that we have this problem called insulin resistance. If you're insulin resistant, as about 50 to 60% of South Africans probably are, if you eat a high carbohydrate diet, ultimately you will become fat and you will become diabetic. And the problem with the carbohydrates is that they're even more addictive than ever before. And perhaps I can end by saying that the old idea that you must count your calories and you must count portion size and you must restrict and that's how you lose weight, it never, ever works in the long term. Because why? And I can use this example. I'm sure you've all been to some of our fabulous national parks in South Africa. Have you ever watched a lion eating a buffalo? Is there someone tapping the lion on the shoulder and say, listen, Mr. Lion, today you had this enormous meal. Tomorrow you're only allowed to catch an impala because otherwise you're going to get fat. And the answer is no. Because that animal has an apostat that works properly. It's eating the food it is designed to eat. And it will regulate its weight perfectly as a consequence. You take that lion out and you put it in a zoo, and what happens? They get fat and they get diabetic. Why? Because they're the most insulin-resistant animals on this planet. And if you do not feed it exactly the same food that it gets in its environment, it will get fat. Now, take the analogy to all of us. We are living in a zoo. We're eating zoo food. And that's why we're fat. And that's why we're diabetic. And the goal of this book that Jono has been driving is that if you want to be healthy for your life, you've got to get away from, stop eating zoo food. And you have to learn how to cook. So the most important thing Stellenbosch University can teach you, apart from how stupid we all are, and how none of us know anything, and 50% of what we say is wrong, including what I say, hopefully your university will teach you that, but they'll also teach you to cook, because that will be the other attribute. So on that point, I'm going to hand over to the cook who helped design the book, and it was his idea, and he'll tell us a bit about his experiences with this book. Thank you very much. We'll have questions afterwards.
Afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. I'm going to put this thing on the stand. I don't usually come on after Prof. I'm usually the curtain raiser. I'm under a little bit of pressure here. But yeah, just before we get into Q&A, I'm just going to tell you a little story about the book. It's quite funny. This time last year, we were busy actually writing the book. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how it started. We got together to try and put together a little charity scheme, actually, to raise some money for a charity called Operation Smile. And we thought writing a cookbook, could generate a little bit of annuity income. So we all got together, had coffee last year on the 8th of July, and we thought it would be very nice to have the book out before Christmas. And what happened, working back from our Christmas timetable, we realized that if we wanted the books to be in shops before Christmas, we only had 28 days to write the book. So there were two chefs, David Greer and myself, and Sally Ann Creed is a nutritionist, so she was in charge of writing the diet, and Prof was going to write a great scientific argument to back up why all the recipes would be really, really healthy for you. And off we went. Originally, Prof was just going to write a little intro, and obviously as time went on, he got more and more stuck in. And in fact, I remember reading one of his emails saying, "It's getting really good now, we're really going to stick it to them." And anyway, so about 2 weeks later, we all met for coffee to have a look at all the content we had written. And Prof walked in and he had a big document of paper, and he said, "Okay, so it's about 10,000 words, but I just want to fine-tune it a little bit because I'm not 100% satisfied." So already we were kind of very grateful to have all this extra content in our book. We're almost finished with the recipes, and the red, yellow, and green lists were done. So we gave it another 2 weeks, and at our final content meeting, Prof walks in with this massive wad of paper 10 minutes later and slams it down, and he says, "Okay, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is it's all there. The bad news is it's 20,000 words." So we'd gone from getting an intro for our sort of cookbook to writing recipes for the Tim Noakes diet book, which is very nice. Anyway, so we were originally going to self-publish because we wanted to raise lots of money for charity, and we spent a week looking for sponsors. We didn't really come right. So we took it to a publisher who jumped at the thought of it. In fact, I emailed the document through. It was then a 70 or 80,000 word document, and I got an email an hour later saying, "We're in." So I doubt they even read the book. They just sort of said, "Okay, we'll publish this guy." And anyway, so a month later, the book was completely shot and designed and went off to print. So we got the entire book done from our first copy to actually going to print in 63 days, which was amazing. And since then, obviously, things have gone absolutely mental. The bookshelves have gone red. But the really, really great news out of all of it was that the publisher agreed to donate R5 to charity for every book sold to Operation Smile. So we crossed the 120,000 book mark the other day, which means we've raised 600,000 Rand for Op Smile, which is fantastic. And the news gets even better. About a month ago, we launched our first official new language, or our second official South African language, so we've got 9 left. There's now an Afrikaans edition, Die Kosrevolusie, 'n kos kan die wêreld verander. And as of today, we are officially going international. This week we'll be signing a book deal that's going to put us in 36 countries by the middle of next year. So Prof set out with the goal to change the world one meal at a time, and he's really doing that. So we're very happy to be part of his team. Right, that's it from me. I think it's time to open the floor for Q&A.
I'd just like to make everybody aware of the process of the questions. How it's going to work is we're going to have a question at a time. So please direct either of your questions to the specific person you'd like them to answer. Thank you.
Please ask any question in any language. I fully understand Afrikaans. I may not answer in Afrikaans though. You will excuse me. And remember, there's no stupid questions, there are only stupid answers. So anything that you ask, we will answer respectfully. Yes, please.
Hi.
I think we can hear you.
1, 2.
I just want to know, how has this changed the whole lifestyle of being on a whole diet your whole life? And now all of a sudden you're going into this high protein, sugar, more vegetable. Like, what kind of changes have to my iron athlete? How am I going now for my one race that I had a lot of carbohydrates for this month, where I had carbs, and now I have to go into this program to maintain my weight?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Remember that the main focus, my main focus, is that if you're insulin resistant, this is the diet you need to follow. And if you're insulin resistant, you will feel progressively less healthy as you age. So I'm ancient, I'm much older than all of you, but I didn't realize that for 20 years I was suffering. I didn't recognize the symptoms. Only when I went back and read what Atkins had written in 1972, he said, if you're insulin resistant and you eat a high carbohydrate diet, this is the symptoms you will develop with age. And they were described. And the beauty is once you change the diet, you suddenly reverse. And in my running went back 20 years. I went back to a 40-year-old, which was astonishing. And I lost a whole range of symptoms which were due to wheat allergy. And if you're eating wheat, humans can't digest wheat. That's very clear. And we have varying grades of response to wheat. And to other extreme where you get celiac disease or minor symptoms like headaches and sniffles and chronic infections up in the throat and so on, which is what I had. And I thought that's just aging. And as soon as I cut the wheat, then that went out of it. So the point is that if the sicker you are, the better you benefit from this diet, because what you're putting in your mouth is a real problem. My understanding has changed dramatically. When I was at medical school, I believed that most illnesses, there was no pattern, they were idiopathic, we didn't know what caused them. I now think that 85% of chronic ill health, that means the stuff that takes us to obesity, diabetes, chronic autoimmune diseases, I think they're nutritionally based. And that's a huge thing. And so once you get your nutrition right for yourself, you just get rid of all this stuff and you feel so much better. I haven't met anyone who hasn't said to me, thank you, Tim, I've got so much more energy on this diet. It's astonishing. And that we never studied. We don't know what that is. So your body will adapt over a period of 6 weeks, and by 6 weeks you'll start to feel real benefits. And then it continues from there.
You at the back?
Ken Hobson. I was just curious, how would you reconcile your diet for people that have, let's say, different dietary restrictions, or needs, athletes, vegetarian even? Like how would you make those fit together?
Sure. Firstly, we respect the vegetarian's position, absolutely. We must treat animals properly, and they're not treated properly. So we understand that. My opinion is that the best diet in the world is a vegetarian who cheats. Okay? By that I mean they cheat by eating some protein, animal protein. It seems to me that it's difficult to get a really good diet if you exclude all animal protein. I'm not suggesting you have to eat a whole bunch of animal protein, but the vegetarian diet I'm talking about is one where you have eggs, dairy, and some fish. And if you do that, you will be extremely healthy. And I understand it may not be possible, but biologically it seems that there are certain elements in eggs and fish or other animal proteins that you need. So that's what we promote. If you can't do that, what we say is go increase the fat consumption in your diet. Find olive oil and coconut oil and nuts and eat a lot of them. Because if you're insulin resistant and therefore you're carbohydrate intolerant, a vegetarian diet is a very high carbohydrate diet, and it's very difficult to control weight. And if you have a wheat allergy or a vegetable problem with digesting vegetables, you have all sorts of gut problems, and that also is one of the complications of the diet. Yeah.
Hi there. I'm a bit like the lion, actually. I prefer to keep eating buffalo rather than the impala. So my question is, how do you regulate, or how do you know what the right amount of meat is? Because I love meat, and I will just keep eating it.
Yeah.
So how do I know what portion, when enough is enough, as my wife says?
Yeah. That's a great question. So our theory is that once you're eating properly and you've got the upper stat corrected, and it's not being hijacked by all these addictive foods, because that's what's happened. It's been hijacked by addictive foods. But you have to get your carbohydrates down. Please understand this. You can't do this thing halfway, because what really causes our medical problems is consistently high insulin levels. And that's what's causing our ill health. So every time you eat carbs, you spike your insulin. And the insulin is a stimulus for a whole bunch of abnormalities in the body. So just to put it very clearly, you were raised on the theory that cholesterol causes heart disease. There is absolutely no evidence for that at all. None at all. In other words, you were told if you eat saturated fat, you raise your cholesterol, it clogs your arteries. That has never been shown to be true. It's a myth that has been perpetuated. It is much more likely that in people who are insulin resistant, it's repeated insulin secretion that causes the problems. So if you're eating lots of meat and fat and sugar, you're going to kill yourself, because you've still got the insulin, and as soon as you're driving insulin, the fat in the diet is used completely differently. So the fat that I had for breakfast, or actually we had lunch there, that fat in me is being oxidized, it's being burnt as a fuel. If I've got a whole lot of insulin, if I eat a lot of carbohydrate with it, it doesn't, it gets stored and then it gets all wrong and you get the high cholesterol, all those problems. And then it causes arterial problems. So, in your case, if you want to eat a lot of meat, you may not eat carbohydrate. That's the key. But we don't believe a high meat diet is good. We would like you to have a lot of fat as well. And the best fat, in my opinion, is lamb meat, lamb fat from Peru, because that is completely organic, etc. And I would rather you ate the fat with little meat rather than lots of meat with little fat. Okay. And if you do that, once you get your fat intake right and your carbohydrate intake down, your weight will go stabilized. It'll go back to what you want it to be. Okay.
Yeah, going in the white.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of the diet, and I was wondering, on the original eating website, there's a list of all the different carbohydrate contents, and on there it says there that coconut cream, say, is like 6.2 grams, and then milk is 5 grams.
Yeah.
But you say that if you want to lose weight, dairy should be, taken,
Yeah.
you should maybe cut it out at first.
Yeah.
Why is it better to have the coconut cream?
That's great. So the question is, on the original eating website, we give you carbohydrate intakes, and in fact, coconut milk. Coconut cream has a higher sugar intake or carbohydrate intake than milk. And the answer is you'll never take as much. That's the key. Whereas milk, you can easily take a glass of milk and think that it's low carbohydrate. It's not. It's quite high carbohydrate. So I think that's the reality. It's the volume that you would take is much less in coconut cream than in milk.
And does the fat content not play a part?
We don't really concern ourselves with the fat content. Yeah. Okay, John, I want...
So sorry, I was just going to add to what Prof said there about the dairy versus coconut milk. Women in particular struggle with metabolizing lactose. It's like a complex the chef, so please excuse me, I'm not sure of the science there. But one of the things that does come up a lot is a lot of women are lactose intolerant. So you'll get men who can eat double thick yogurt for breakfast every single day. And women will remove all carbs and eat double thick yogurt for breakfast and then just not lose weight. Not necessarily put on weight, but as soon as they remove lactose from the diet, the weight just drops off. So that's another reason.
More questions? Hi,
I'm from Stellenbosch University's newsletter. I have two joint questions, two and a half. The first is, do you think this is feasible on a student budget? Maybe tie that into where Prof Noakes said there's a book coming out with Bantam figure out a day. And secondly, please comment on the cauliflower shortage.
Yeah. Very sorry about the cauliflower shortage. When it comes to being a student and living on this diet, okay, you can open an enormous can of worms about the price of food in general and the fact that living healthily is more expensive than it looks, and I think that the entire world has a warped perception on you know what people consider to be expensive for food. Like, if being healthy is more expensive, then shouldn't having a nice car or, you know, owning all this cool stuff be slightly less important than actually living a healthy life? So that's my personal opinion. But it's not as expensive as it looks. The cookbook is an upmarket cookbook. We really wanted to appeal to people right at the top because they make decisions in industry, and it's just it was the first necessary step. We are working on another cookbook for making it more affordable. You know, you don't need to have fake carbohydrates. Like, as soon as you want to make bread or pasta or a flat chunk, you're going to have to buy flour that's not flour. And the reason flour is the cheapest staple is because it's mass produced. So getting almond flour is obviously going to, you know, drive your costs up. If you just eat normal meats and vegetables, or a cheese omelette, I mean, cheddar cheese and 2 eggs for breakfast is delicious and very healthy. In fact, I lose weight every day that I have a cheese omelette. The next day I'll wake up. I mean, cheese omelette for breakfast, the next day I wake up and I would have lost like 400 grams. Unfortunately, I don't do it as often as I would like. But you know, you don't actually need to have all those expensive things. Offal is another cheap thing that you can eat. Chicken liver is it's delicious, really, really healthy, and we promote that too.
Do you have a due date for the book, the experiment?
We're trying for April or Easter next year. Yeah.
Thank you. Hello. Yeah, in terms of high intensity sports, how can we use this type of eating to help increase our performance, but also at the same time feel good, look good?
Yeah. Okay, so the first thing is eating a diet will make you look good because it strips off the fat and you look very muscular. And you know, if you ever see a picture of someone looking cut, I can tell you that they're eating a high protein, high fat diet. I had a visit from Jake White yesterday, the former Springbok coach, and he's covering the Sharks. And he said, so tell me about this diet. You know, it's definitely, a lot of people are interested in it. And I said that the component that we need to look at is recovery, how well you recover. And eating a high carbohydrate diet produces an inflammatory response. And also, if you also eat running a lot, exercising a lot. And I said, I think that's a real component that we need to look at. So, in short, if you're a sprint athlete or an athlete running short distance events, maybe lasting up to half an hour, a lot of the people complain they lose a little bit of their top speed. But once the event goes longer than that, I think that this diet then becomes very advantageous. And if you're doing something over 6 hours, this is the only diet you should worry about, because then you can adapt and burn so much fat that you don't need carbohydrates. So I think it's a very individual thing. I'm going in 2 weeks' time to speak to the leading Australian football team. That's Australian rules. And that's the most professional sport in Australia. And they have learned that this is the diet that is improving their performance. And those guys run 20 kilometers in a game. And they have to recover quickly and so on. So there is a movement to realize that this diet may have advantages that we hadn't thought about. And so I think you have to try it yourself. And my advice is that you cut to 200 grams of carbohydrate a day, because no human being needs more than 200 grams a day. And you see what your performance does. And I would say it won't change. It might get better, but it won't change. And then you cut a little bit less, more and more and more, and see how far you can go down, and then you adapt from that. So a lot of the very successful athletes we've worked with find that They train on low carbohydrates. Before a marathon, they will eat 200 grams a day before, and they will have a little carbohydrate during the race, but much less than they ever had before. So I think it's something you have to work on and experiment with yourself. And some will find they need absolutely no carbohydrates, and some will find, no, they do need some carbohydrate. But it's much less than they had in the past.
Unfortunately, we cannot take any more questions. If you have any more, please ask after the discussion. We are going to have prizes now. And
Yep, Jono and I'll be here for some time if you'd like to chat afterwards.